Hello, everybody. My name is Lucinda Walker. As many of you know, I'm the director of the library, and I want to welcome you to tonight's snapshot event, Through a Sheep's Eyes, Pets, Livestock, and Wild Animals with Mary Lake. We want to extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as to the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsor of our entire snapshot series is the Vermont Department of Libraries and the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the Alma Gibbs Donchian Foundation. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Anne Commier Fund for Women in the Humanities, and in addition, the Friends of the Library has generously underwritten this year's host fee. Tonight we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and to be inspired in community. Just before I begin, one brief housekeeping note. The next snapshot event, hosted by the Goodrich Memorial Library in Newport, is Reproductive Rights and Justice in the 1970s and Today, with UVM history professor Felicia Kornbluth. That'll be on March 20th at 7 p.m. You can also view it online. Just register at Vermont Humanities. So now, it is my distinct and wonderful pleasure to introduce you to tonight's speaker. I've been so eager to meet her and hear her talk. Mary Lake is a shearer, butcher, and shepherd based in Tunbridge. She travels the Northeast shearing and trimming hooves of sheep and goats. She is a former full-time butcher at the Royal Butcher, where she slaughtered and cut meat. Now she is an itinerant on-farm slaughterer for hire, processing sheep, goat, pigs, and small bovines. Mary works with the Vermont Sheep and Goat Association to promote healthy and efficient sheep and goat production. She raises sheep for breed stock, meat, sheepskins, and fleece, some of which you will see at the table over there. So, without further ado, Mary Lake.
Thank you. Hi. Just want to put out there that I no longer slaughter pigs and cows. Just took that off my list of things I offer. I got too busy. So anybody listening, don't call me for that. So I have this thing that I really want to talk about that's pretty specific to shepherding, but I'm also open to taking some questions too if you have them. Is there a way for people online to ask questions? They can? Okay, great. And I was joking when I came here, it's like, this is a little awkward for me because I'm usually doing something while I'm talking, like slaughtering or cutting up a lamb or shearing or something. So I'm like, what do I do with my body right now? I don't know. But thank you all for coming. And can I get a feel for what you guys are here for? Are any of you shepherds, or are you mainly just interested in hearing some stories? Stories. Any shepherds in here? Some sheep people? Okay. Some farmers? Okay, cool. All right, so this is pretty farming heavy. I was saying you gave me a soapbox to stand on and I'm just gonna go with it. Yeah, so and I also am very proud of my slideshow tonight. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of give you a feel for what this little life that I've created for myself and my family. So this is my husband, Paul, and we have two sons. And we have a farm in Tunbridge, Vermont, where we raise about 20 to 25 ewes. So we have up to 60 or 80 sheep in the summertime. And we have 25 acres of grazing land, but we graze our neighbors a lot, probably up to 200 acres. We have really great neighbors, retired dairy farmers and some second homeowners, and we've kind of used the community to our advantage and gotten everybody on board with what we're doing and make it kind of a community event when we move sheep and stuff. So I knew that when I wanted to go into farming, that I wouldn't be able to most likely make a living from farming. And I kind of scrambled around because I also had no idea of how to acquire land for farming, and thought that I would probably just work on other people's farms until the ball got rolling and I kind of figured out over time what my role in farming would be. But you'll kind of see that all of these things that I've put together into one life, they were desperate attempts to make money and support me potentially farming. So that's how I became a shearer, shepherd, and butcher. So I've been shearing for about 16 years. And it all started basically the first day I went to work at a sheep farm. It was shearing day, and Jim McCrae was there, and he's a pretty well-known shearer in the state. And he said, you should come to my shearing school. And so I went to the shearing school, and it was like a really great experience. There were, it still is now a really great shearing school because it brings in like all of the shearers in this region to come help teach the shearing school. So the year that I was there was a really great year. There were some shearers that didn't come back since then, but Kevin Ford was there, who's a really well-known blade shearer, and there was also a woman from Quebec who was there with her son, and they're two memorable people for me because Kevin was wearing this jacket that said like U.S. shearing team. And I was like, wait, this is competitive? And then the woman, Nicole from Quebec, she and her son sheared a sheep together. So she had her like 9-year-old son on her back, and he held the machine and she did all the footwork. So it was kind of a demonstration to show that your hands are doing something different than your legs are doing. And I remember leaving that school being like, I want to be a sheep shearer, I want to do it competitively, and I want to be a mom. and things just kind of panned out from there. But I did some other shearing schools after that. So that school it was a day long there then. I think now it's 2 days. It is 2 days, I know, because now I organize the school. But at the time, I was looking for other schools to do. I was like, how can I get this? Shearing is like this really technical skill. It looks pretty simple. You look kind of like you're wrestling, but it's a dance with moves that you need to memorize, and there's also a machine that you have to figure out how to use. And so I needed to do more schools before I felt like I could go do it as a business. And I did a week-long shearing school in Washington State, and kind of in a school out in New York, and was shearing just on the nights and weekends, and thought that I couldn't really make a career out of it, but ended up just going for it after I had kids. I decided not to go back to work and just have my own business. And so everyone always asks these questions, and they're kind of important questions, like how many do you do? And so I go to about 300 farms every year, which is about 4,000 sheep sheared. And which is kind of a drop in the bucket as far as sheep sheared in a year for a lot of other shearers in the world. But the 300 farms is a big number. And just recently, I kind of felt more of like a true shearer when I went out to South Dakota for a shearing school and competition. Because other shearers there were kind of like, where's Vermont and what are there sheep there? And I was kind of like, look at my schedule. This is what I'm doing. And they, like one of them was like, well, you shear way more than I do. But the way that they shear there is like on a crew at a place where there's 10,000 sheep, and they're there for a week. And there were also people kind of like, how can you be a mom and shear? And how can you have sheep and shear? Like, it was kind of like, how are you a shearer? And I was like, no, I'm really a shearer. And it was this big question. I'm like, right? I am, right? And it made me feel very fortunate to be in Vermont and to have made certain decisions. Like when I decided to be a shearer, I decided to not go to Australia. And I decided to stay in Vermont and try to figure out how to be a shearer doing small flocks. And I'm proving you can be a legit shearer, even doing small flocks out here. Because I did really well in the blade competition in South Dakota. So now I feel like, see. And so I started shearing before I started butchering, but butchering was something that I was kind of reluctant to get into. But when I made the decision to like be a livestock farmer, to be doing sheep, I saw right away that in order to raise livestock, processing them had to be a part of it. Because of that, because they are not pets, there's that difference. They're not wild animals, they're not pets. And it was like humans domesticated them. It wasn't my decision to domesticate them, but they're here, and I kind of want to take on that responsibility of caring for them and figuring that out. I thought that was interesting. So, but I also wanted to know what was happening at the slaughterhouses. So it was kind of like a kind of stigmatized part of the industry where there was kind of a black curtain that I wanted to get behind and be like, what is happening at slaughterhouses? And can I get behind this and feel proud about what I'm doing when I send animals there? And so I asked other sheep producers what slaughterhouses they trusted most, and like a lot of people said the Royal Butcher, which was great because it was also the closest slaughterhouse to where I was living. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go and try to get a job there. And they did hire me with no experience whatsoever. Like barely held a sharp knife before. So that I was doing full time, 5 days a week, at a USDA facility. I wrote down the animal welfare approved and the Whole Foods. Those were really important things that were part of my time at the Royal Butcher because they had auditing systems. So we had protocol to be USDA inspected, but we also were certified animal welfare approved and produced for Whole Foods, which was more strict than the USDA. So, and because of both of those things, I got to know a lot about Temple Grandin, and she became somebody who really inspired me a lot. And we were audited by her third party, I can't think of the word, but we met her specs from her company. And so we had to be trained in humane handling and humane slaughter. So that was really important for me because that really made it all make sense. And I worked right up until my due date for my first child, and I was gonna go back, but then I was like, actually, there's no way I can go back because I couldn't afford childcare at the wages I was getting at the slaughterhouse, and I also just wanted to be a mom. So and people from the Royal Butcher, like customers, were kind of like, why don't you just do on-farm slaughter? And so I kind of looked into that and had a good little customer base growing. So after the kids were born, then I started doing on-farm slaughter and shearing as a business on my own. I like this one. This is kind of funny because, like, it's all you really do as a shepherd is just look at their poop and make sure it looks like little milk duds or raisinets. And, yeah. So I've been working with sheep for 16 years. I started at Knoll Farm in Fayston, Waitsfield area, and that was great because I kind of learned on somebody else's sheep, and and so I kind of got to watch a pro shepherd do her thing, and for 4 years, and then on the 5th year, she took a sabbatical with her family, so I got to like manage the farm, and really feel the responsibility of things, and a lot of my first sheep came from that farm. But I also started working for the Vermont Sheep and Goat Association. I have a degree in journalism. So I was like, can I do your newsletter? And so then I just started writing articles about things I wanted to learn about. And that was great because it was all good things for other people to learn about. And then I've had my sheep for about 13 years now, and it's going great. We started lambing today. Yeah, it's exciting. I wanted to say that I've learned mostly through observation and experiences, because a lot of my customers will come to me saying like, but the book says to do this, or this is what I read, or this is what I've researched online, and I'm kind of like, that's all great, but it's so, like farming in general, but I feel like especially with sheep, maybe, it's like so, there's so many factors to keep in mind. And this picture is a fun one, because this was me like learning about how a flock on an island off the coast of Maine exists, like how that all works. And it was so great to do this, because they're kind of wild. They're, like there are wild sheep and there are domesticated sheep. So they are domesticated sheep, but totally managed in this wild way where they have full range of an island. There's no predators, so there's like no fencing. There's also like no drinking water. And like, I guess they drink dew, and they eat like bayberry and poison ivy and seaweed, and their hooves are amazing, their carcasses are amazing. They all single, so instead it's like more typical for sheep to have twins, but here they're mostly just having singles. And these are all the lambs that were born that year. This is one of 5 boats of lambs. And then we sheared all the ewes that were there. But also, this is the only boat with only one human in the back. They were like, Mary can handle it. And so this was also me testing my theory about, will sheep jump into the ocean?
And what was the survey?
I guess last year they did, but they did not this year.
You weren't here this year.
Right, yeah, and I was there like, will my presence be enough for them to not jump? Like, if I'm calm and cool. So I got to test a lot of things that I had kind of grown to know about sheep, and then really see them play out in this wild flock. And I'm really excited to go back, and we're going to go back this year. Yeah, that's kind of a digression there. But this is my son Hugo giving a thumbs up. He almost got it right. So this was us at a wool pool. We used to collect wool. The state of Vermont, like shepherds in Vermont used to do a wool pool annually. And I think it went kind of out of style in the 90s. The price of wool went down, and we started it back up for a little bit. So this is about 6 years ago we did this, and we got a ton of wool that people had been storing. And since then, the wool price has plummeted even more as like a national commodity or international commodity. So, but what has gone up is our local wool economy. So, the more I learn about sheep and the more I leave Vermont, the more I appreciate this industry in our region. Because, like, when we were out in South Dakota, we were at this shearing school, and they had 10,000 sheep at this feedlot. It was Rambouillets, which are like merino, and merino's like, you can't get better wool than merino. So they're very similar to merinos. And we sheared like 600 or 700, and they baled all the wool. And then they put the bales in this like barn that's full of other bales of wool that they can't sell. They're just like holding it and storing it, because it's cheaper for companies like Pendleton to, even though they're American companies, it's cheaper for them to get wool from overseas, processed in China, and shipped to them. And not necessarily wool from China, so it's like wool that probably started out in New Zealand and Australia, then went to China, then comes to the US. And it's cheaper to do that than to buy American wool. And it's just kind of mind-boggling. But then when I come here and all my customers, so many of them are not necessarily just wool producers. They're, like they're dairy producers and meat producers, but they're taking their wool and they're doing stuff with it, and people are buying it locally, and it just makes me feel really happy to be here. And I feel like there are a lot of models that we have here that could be applied in other parts of the country. And this is just one of them. So with all those customers that I have, the 300 farms that I'm going to, there are common challenges that I come across all the time. And especially this time of year, I get to be a broken record about parasites. And especially this year, I'm like totally negative Nancy. I'm like, we're in for it. This year's gonna be bad. Like, there's parasites, they're just gonna explode, and we gotta do all the things to be prepared for it. And I've been working up towards this the past few years, especially with climate change, being like, how do we make stronger flocks? Like, we can't get more parasite drugs. We can't, we can't put Band-Aids over things. We have to do it as shepherds and farmers. And really, the parasite thing is like, if we can have that at the forefront and make a lot of our goals or a lot of our decisions based on parasite management, then all the other things fall into place. Like, you will have better wool, you will have better carcasses, you'll have better milk. So today I'll kind of be talking a lot about culling, because this is just like something that I tend to try to get people to kill their sheep. I'm like the kiss of death when I go to people's farms. I'm like, this is a great sheep, but how much longer does she really have? I'm like, do you have an end of life plan for this sheep? But so this remedy that I'm writing about this is really, it's kind of hardcore shepherding. It's like end of life planning at your farm. And what I have found by doing it pretty hardcore for the past 7 years is like, that it has been very beneficial to the sheep and to the land and to me, to like my happiness and my family's happiness. And it's made it so I've been able to produce more things and share them with people, and that's brought me a lot of joy. And so that's kind of like the word that I spread when I go around shearing. It's basically, what do you think about culling? And it's a hard one to talk about, but we get there. But so my big message is growing resilient flocks, especially as climate change is happening. And I think I'm not alone in feeling a lot of anxiety about climate change as a farmer. I mean, I think we've all been seeing that, especially with the flooding last year, that like being a farmer right now is just bonkers. And also the whole global climate is kind of bonkers. So this way of thinking about shepherding, where I'm always just like, what makes my flock stronger? What makes my flock more resilient? Has been a great antidote to my anxiety. So it's kind of like, it's this action that I can take that makes me feel like I'm doing things in a way that help the sheep be healthier, helps me sequester carbon in my grazing practices, and produce things instead of us buying things from all over the world, and less plastic and all these things. And that's also brought me a lot of joy. Yeah, that's my dog Jack. Lots of joy right there. And this is kind of how I sell resilient farm growing. It's like, basically what I come up against is a lot of people saying like, but I love my sheep. How can I not have them here? And how can I make the decision about them not being here? But when we do it, these are my goals of what we can come up with. So healthier sheep, improved soils, stronger immunity, less loss throughout the year to parasites, more success through stress, which is a really big one, because there's a lot of stress in sheep just moving from one farm to another farm. So if part of your business plan is selling breed stock, it's so important that they are strong and healthy so that they can handle that move and that transition to a new place. Here's me talking about my farm goals, and number one thing is parasite management, and that's where I kind of stopped, but it's a good one. You might not understand the whole parasite thing, but sheep and goats are super susceptible to parasite overload. They always have parasites in them, and when their immunity goes down, or when they are weakened for some reason, those parasites can go up and can become a real problem. And there are drugs to kill the parasites, but there aren't that many. And you have to be very careful about how you give the dewormers. If you don't give them properly, they can actually kind of like make the parasites stronger, and the parasites can become quickly resistant to the dewormer. So it's a really interesting thing about sheep and goats, because it's the one thing that makes it super hard to be certified organic as a sheep producer. There aren't a lot of organic sheep farms. I don't know if you've noticed that. There's like 3. I mean, there are like very few in Vermont, and it's because of parasites. It's like it's just hard to manage. So if you are organic, you have to keep really good records about who gets dewormed, because then they are out of the organic program for a while, and whatever. So a lot of shepherds don't go through all the work to become certified organic, but most are very close to being really organic. And it's with climate change and it being warmer and wetter, parasites are going to explode, basically. So the last few years have been really hard, and it makes it hard for people getting into it. And it's something that a lot of people might not know about sheep, and then you learn very fast and hard how horrible it can be. But as I did more sheep farming, these goals that I wrote for our farm kind of evolved. So I had a good idea after working at Knoll Farm of what I really wanted to do. I knew I really wanted to honor the animals in our farming practices, and I wanted to have healthy animals and healthy humans, and this balanced landscape. So I'm really proud of being in a state where there is quite a good balance between farmland and wildland and residential land. And to kind of keep that balanced, our farmland needs to keep being farmed. So that was the role I saw us playing. I was like, well, we can definitely work with that and still work with the nature around us. But this increase of resiliency in response to climate change, that's come out more in the past few years. And what was interesting about it was I was doing it before I knew I was doing it. And when I realized what I was doing, it made me feel a lot more proud of what I was doing. I was like, oh, this whole sheep farming thing is actually kind of cool. And it gave me more purpose in what I was doing. And I know that there is numbers out there that say sheep do it better than cows. I think Middlebury College figured that one out. So, yeah, I love it. Okay, so this is my little sheep destiny map. So this is for our farm. When I go around to other farms, one thing the shearers in South Dakota joked with me about was like, thank God I'm not a shearer in the Northeast, like, because you're not just a shearer. You're also kind of like a vet and a therapist and everything, and you're like a farm planner, and you kind of do a lot on shearing day. Shearing day is a great day to do it. Same with slaughter day and the whole lambing season. Those are times during your year where you can collect a lot of data to see how you're doing as a shepherd. And so I love shearing day and slaughter day at other people's farms because we are looking at every inch of the sheep, and we're looking at the inside of the sheep, and we really get an idea for how we did throughout the year. And because I go to a lot of places, I kind of see patterns, and so I have a lot to say when we're going through things, and I can usually answer questions pretty well or direct people into the right direction for finding an answer. And but we do a lot of this kind of thing, like, what is your farm goal? Where are these sheep going to go? And how long do you want to do this for? So I knew that I really wanted to have sheep for a long time. I wanted to have a sheep farm for my life, which meant I knew I'd have to reproduce sheep. So I was going to be lambing. And so if you follow this, we have our lambs. When we look at our whole lamb crop, we make a decision about whether they go to market or whether they go to breed stock. And a lot of this, I know the day they're born, and then some of them I don't know until we get a little bit closer. But for the most part, I know what animals I want breed stock from, and I also know at this point, like, who I want sheepskins from and who I want horns from and that sort of thing. So the lambs that stay on, they make that breed stock category. They can go to other farms to be breed stock, or they'll stay in the home flock. And I will not breed them until they're a year and a half. So we have Icelandic sheep, so they're a little bit smaller, but this is a good rule for pretty much any breed, is if you give that lamb a fence jumper, or if you've got one that is not very resistant to parasites or has hoof problems or something, then you can say, okay, you can go to my yearling market or my hogget market. And I can also decide if I want to sell any of those ones to be in somebody else's flock, or they'll go on to be a breeder in my flock. And so within the past year or so, I've actually given myself an age range for my ewes. And so my breeding ewes that are, 1.5 to 7 years old. I used to keep sheep much older than that. And some sheep can really do that. They can have lambs at 9 or 10 years old. But what I've found in the past 10 years of doing this is that when they do, their lambs are usually the ones that struggle a little bit more. Or I have found that I have put them through a little bit more suffering than maybe was necessary. So when I make the call of around 7 or 8 years old to cull them, there's a lot to them that is marketable still. And if there isn't, they can always go to compost and become part of the soil, which is a whole nother thing that can be really beneficial to your farm. When you think about kind of like what are we mining from the soils in our grazing practices. Amber Reed is a great grazing specialist who kind of helped me think about that. She was kind of like, well, think about what you're mining from the soil, from your sheep grazing. What are the sheep taking from the soil that they're not putting back? And it's like what they are putting towards their bone and fat and muscle. So when we can put that back into the soil, then we have this nice cycle. But now I have done a good job of getting lots of marketable things from the cull ewes. A lot of times they're the meat that we eat, so they're not like skin and bones and sickly. They're like looking pretty good, so they're great for ground meat and stew. And they have beautiful sheepskins and beautiful skulls, and they also usually have a lot of fat that we make into soap. So for our farm, this is what works really well, and it's not for everybody, and that's okay too. So I talk a lot to my customers about, so life planning is basically lambing, which is what everybody wants to do and is really, really fun. And just like lambs are great. And what's even greater is like making sure that you're lambing ewes that you really want to get lambs from and that aren't too old and won't be too stressed by it. And that you're breeding for the right thing. So a lot of times people will be breeding for like color and character and like how much they let me pet them and those kind of things. And those aren't necessarily things that make a resilient sheep. So I'm like, that's great, but so I think down here at the bottom I wrote, the things that I'm thinking about prioritizing in my ewes. There's a lot of things. Like, I think at this point with my flock, I'm kind of like, all of my ewes are really good. And so I'm kind of like seeing like who's really going to stand out and give me the things that I want. So now that I've gotten through this point where I have culled for ewes that don't have any issues at lambing, that they can lamb on their own, and then they twin, and that they have nice horns and nice hooves, and they don't have parasite problems. Now I can be like, all right, let's get some cool colors in there. Let's go for spots. Let's do this. Let's do that, which I've done a little bit throughout all of the years, but now I can like really do that even more. But along with a life plan, you should have a death plan. And I like saying that it's just as important as all the things that you do for lambing. I like that. So like the shepherds, the humans, we enable survival. And so it's kind of our responsibility really to help. Like the sheep need their shepherds in death as much as they do in life. And I think one thing I wanted to see was like, can we talk about this stuff without it being the most depressing thing ever? And for some reason, it's not depressing to me. And I think that it's because like right there on slaughter day, it's like when you're slaughtering your healthy animals, when it's not like you're slaughtering animals you don't like. When, like, you know, I remember people coming into the slaughterhouse with like a really nasty ram and them just being like, I'm so glad to bring him here, you know. And it always felt kind of bad, or I felt bad about it, being like, oh, that's like, I don't know, it just didn't feel good. I want to feel good about the lambs I bring to the slaughterhouse. And that was kind of a crazy idea, but that was kind of like, how do I get there? How do I get excited about the sheep that I'm slaughtering? And it was by making all those decisions about putting parasites first, because then I could kind of see how I was doing and how I was getting better. Because the better I was getting at as a shepherd meant the happier and healthier the sheep were and the better their life was. And so slaughter day ended up being this day where it was like, okay, let's like unwrap these presents and see what's inside, which is just crazy. But it got, I want to say it got the job done, but I kind of was like, that is maybe how we should feel. We should feel really happy and grateful for the animals. And can only do that by having the death plans for them. So for the lambs, that's pretty easy. But for your ewes and your rams, it can be a little bit harder. And I put this picture up here. This is our new dog, Bolt. But back when we did that talk, and I told this story about my son, who, when my dad died, he was 4 years old, and he had asked, like, what do we do now? Like, do we butcher Poppy? And I was like, no, no, we don't. Let's talk about that. And he was 4 at the time, and he had come to many jobs with me. We had done a lot of honoring the animal, and like that was his experience to that date of how to deal with death and things that we love. And so he was like, and I could tell that he was like, I know that doesn't sound right, but what do you do, kind of, like. And so we had a great talk about it. I'm like, no, we'll honor Poppy in a different way, and we will cremate him. So we had talked about cremation. And then when our dog Jack died, he was 7 or 8, and he said, I know we're not going to butcher Jack. And I was like, that's right. So it's like the story's continuing. And he's like, I know we're not going to butcher Jack. And I was like, right. And I was like, but what should we do? And I didn't know at that point either. And this was before Jack had died. We were coming up with how to put Jack down. We knew he had cancer in his lungs. So we were like, just back from the vet, where they're like, we don't understand how your dog is still alive. And so I was like, we need to put him down, but what are we going to do with him? And so we talked through it all. We're like, should we cremate him? Should we bury him? Like, what do we do? So as a family, we came up with this plan of like, this was right around Mother's Day, and they had just bought me that cherry tree for Mother's Day. And so they were like, what if we take this gigantic rock and we'll bury Jack, put the rock on top of Jack, and plant your tree next to the rock. And then that can be our special spot for Jack. And we did that, and we had our large animal vet come to the farm and put Jack down. He was in our arms. We were all together right there by the tree when they did it. And it was like a plan that we had made as a family. And we talked about how it's different than what we do for the sheep. It's different than what we do for Poppy. Like this is just what it is. Death is weird, but you do what you need to do to grieve. So that worked out well. Some people do exactly that for their sheep, and that's okay too, as long as you've got like this plan of like when to do it and how and what you want to do about it. The thing that I really like to try to avoid with my customers is when they're like, this sheep is just going to live out its life here and just die here. And I'm like, that could potentially be a ton of suffering, because sheep hide suffering. It's one of their survival tactics. So I was kind of like, let's make a plan about that. So doesn't culling kind of sound like a swear word? It's such a bad word. It does sound like a bad word, but it is kind of the answer to all your problems as a shepherd. And I talk a lot about mimicking the wild. So I think if you're a farmer, you might have heard about mimicking the wild in grazing practices. So that means like kind of using how herd animals, like where would they go for grazing, and kind of doing that, like thinking about where the shade is, where the water is, where the best grass is, and moving them around. So when you do that with grazing, it's very beneficial to the land, and it helps build soils. especially with sheep, because they have this perfect little hooves that aerate the soil, and then their perfect little poop rolls and falls in the holes, and they trample a lot and bed down on the grass, which puts organic matter into the soil. And so by mimicking the wild in that way, you're doing regenerative grazing and in building soils. But I like to mimic the wild in thinking about natural selection. So kind of like out of my flock, if this was a wild flock, which is pretty easy to think about with Icelandic sheep because they do look a lot like wild sheep, but like who would be surviving? And that has helped me a lot, because the sheep with the best horns and the best hooves are going to be the ones that are not getting poopy butts all the time. They're all the ones that are going to be surviving. And by selecting them, they're making my flock more resilient. And then at the same time, I try to select the ones that are the prettiest. So it's kind of like, out of those best ones, who are the prettiest ones? Because I need some really cool sheepskins and that kind of stuff. Chet Parsons, he used to be the UVM extension sheep specialist, and he always said, don't keep problems. And it's like a great thing to say, but kind of hard to hear. And a lot of shepherds say this to me, and they're like, I know I'm not supposed to keep problems, but she's just my favorite sheep. But it's also really hard to know what a problem is until you've been a shepherd for a while. So, and what a problem sheep will be is different from flock to flock because of your farm plan and how you want to manage it. For me, problem sheep are ones that don't stay in the flock. So, if they're fence jumpers or they just do something that can endanger the rest of the flock. So that could be one that is easily overloaded by parasites. So if there's one that's always got a poopy butt, or one that always has lice, or one, they're endangering the rest of the flock. So they're kind of a problem sheep. Yeah, and I did get really strict about this a couple years ago, mainly because I'm so busy. So I was like, I have to really cull hard, and it was super hard to do. But after I did it, the whole flock changed, and like my summer opened up, and I got back to my life, and then I was like, okay, this is the way to do it. Do you have a question?
I do. I guess how patient are you when you realize, oh, that sheep's starting to get a poopy butt? Like, you've been doing this for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like probably not day 3, but at some point, like how do you decide how much time to?
If I see a poopy butt, I deworm it pretty much right then and there.
So you're not gonna call it, but like if it comes back, then.
Yeah, if it's like really persistent, because you can't like just keep deworming, because then you're totally messing up everything. But I'll like deworm them once, and I might write it in that little yellow book. And then if they're one of the sheep that's like, so most of the sheep I'm kind of like, if I'm like, okay, that's a lamb, I need to make sure that lamb who's destined for market, I'll look at when the market date is and make sure I can deworm with a proper amount of time for withdrawal. But I also might be like, I need to make sure that you grow well now so that you can be a good marketable sheep later. And if it's a sheep that I wanted to keep for breeding, then I might just mark it and be like, why did this happen? A lot of times you can kind of figure out why it happened. You can be like, that one has a poopy butt because it's a triplet, or because its mom is 9 years old, or, like there's usually some other thing that has brought that poopy butt to life. And you got to CSI that and figure it out. Think critically. But that's why this logging it, putting it in the little book is a really good thing to do, because a lot of times too that poopy butt will clear up, but then you got a lamb limping. And it's the same lamb that had the poopy butt. There's usually lines you can draw. And
So it's like, what, that's your first strike, might be the poopy butt.
oh yeah,
Dick.
yeah, dick mark. Yeah, yeah. And it got so this time where I got really strict, and this, I mean, this even last lambing season, so I'm lambing, lambs are popping out. It's like popcorn. It's like they're all coming at the same time, and last year I had really big lambs, like these lambs, and luckily I was home, or they were lambing like after I'd gotten home from shearing, or they had been trying to push this lamb out all day and still hadn't done it, kind of thing. But I had to pull a lot of lambs out, and they were big, and but I remember being like, every time I have to pull a lamb out, I'm like, oh no, sister, like you're on the list. Like if I have to go in there and help, because I'm not home during lambing, so I want to make sure I'm out. It's also the busiest time of year for me. I'm shearing. It's shearing season. So it got to this point where I was like, oh my God, all of the sheep are on the list. And I was just getting so depressed. And so I had to stop and be like, no culling decisions will be made at this point. Like I will mark who I pull lambs out of, but I will not put them on a cull list. And it's not even a real list. It's just like a list in my head. But I had to be like, everyone's got a free pass until July. We will revisit this. But I was just, like every other year before that, it just been all of them popping out perfectly. And then this one year, it was hard. And I got a little overwhelmed by it. But yeah, and we'll see what happens this year because I ended up keeping all these ones that I had pulled lambs out of. But yeah, so you can get like carried away with it, and it can just be too much mentally. But it's better than not having a plan and just willy-nilly doing stuff. So yeah, you kind of have to find the balance. Mm-hmm.
So when you are making these culling decisions, is it pretty clear, or are you having to agonize over this one with a poopy butt and a big baby, or this one with a poopy butt and a limb?
It's pretty clear for me. It's like really clear, and I think for a lot of other people, it can be, except for when it really hits the fan and like the whole flock has poopy butts, and then you're just like, let's see who recovers best and get excited about the lambs they have. Like you kind of change the way you're thinking about it. But what I see at other farms, and what has happened to me too, is that my own feelings get in the way. So I'll be keeping sheep for reasons that aren't practical. They're more like very sentimental. And that's the hard part, because this is what you're doing with your life. Like this is your life. How do you want your life to be? You want to be with the animals that you love and that you want. So you have to balance that with, I also really want to have healthy sheep and be able to do this for the rest of my life. So how can I do those two things? So basically I'm like a death doula, and I like go in and I'm like, all right, we're gonna kill Snowball in a year. Let's wrap our heads around it. But I do it more gently than that. Yeah. And usually once you do the first one, so like it was not that long ago that I had to put down the first 2 sheep I had ever bought. Like they were my own sheep. The first sheep so we had just spent, it was a mother and a daughter, and they lambed on the same day every year for 8 years. And like they were there when I was pregnant, like I was there for their first babies. And I remember like coming out with Hugo, and he was born in February, and they're like lambing in March. And I remember one of them realizing I had a baby in my jacket, and they're like looking at me and looking at my baby and looking at me, and I'm looking at them and they're lambing. I'm like, yeah. Like we were like sisters. And then it got to the point where the mom was 10 and the daughter was 9, and their teeth are coming out, and I was like, now's the time to do it. They've twinned every year, and I feel like if I go one more year, it's going to be too much, so I'm going to do it. So I made the decision at lambing time, gave them that last, and gave myself that last grazing season. And they like each had one girl too, which was like work of the gods to get like a ewe lamb from a ewe that you know you're going to cull. And then I actually had my niece come because she was like, I would love to see a slaughter. I've never seen that before. And I'm like, all right, why don't you come here for this day? Because I knew it was going to be really hard. But if I had to like put on the hat of a teacher, then I probably wouldn't bawl as much. And so I could kind of like put on that hat and act like an instructor and not get too emotional about it. But it was super hard. But the crazy thing that happened too, and I tell all my customers this, is like, because I had this plan of like the carcasses, even though they're 9 and 10 years old, I had given them soaked alfalfa cubes in beet pulp for that last summer because their teeth were getting kind of weak. And so they were like in great condition, and their sheepskins were beautiful, and they had fat. And so like their meat was highly edible. Their bones were crap, but the meat was really good. And so I was going to like give the meat to a friend. And what I ended up doing was like, once we got the skin off of them and I saw the carcasses, and like this thing shifted where I was kind of like, no, I think we need to eat this, which I never thought I was going to say. But I was like, they would want me to eat this. Like, I have cared for them so much, now they get to care for me. And it was like, it made sense. And I never would have gotten there if I hadn't seen it and been a part of it. Right. You know, if I had just dropped them off at the slaughterhouse, it wouldn't have happened. But because I was there, and like, that has happened to customers where they were like, that's a cute story, whatever. I'm still not going to eat my pet sheep. And then I skin it, and they're like, you know what? Do you think I could still get in at the cutter? And I'd be like, yes, I think you can. You know, like, we can do this. So it's just crazy how much emotions play into it, and how if you can think about things differently, things can feel good that you didn't think were going to feel good. And yeah, that's kind of what I end up talking a lot about. And it's important to talk about it too with kids. So we came up, we have our farm plan, we're all on board with it. But there are times when you actually really have to play things out to figure out how you feel about them. So this lamb was one that was a hypothermic, and Hugo was like, I got this. He had recently saved one who was also hypothermic, and we thought the lamb was like totally dead. He put it in his sweatshirt, got it to warm up, and we actually were able to put that lamb back on its mom and get it nursing. We didn't even have to have like a bottle-fed lamb. It was like this great success story. So Hugo was kind of like, I'm going to do that again with this one, but this one didn't make it. And it was kind of like, I'm trying to remember exactly. I think that, yeah, it just didn't make it. We did as much as we could, and we put it back on the mom, and it started to nurse a little bit, and we gave it the day, and it died later that day. But there's so many things you can do to save a lamb. But do you want to do all those things? And so it was kind of like, what are our parameters as a family? Like, what are we willing to do, and when, and how much time, and how much money do we put into it, and like, where do we draw the line? And so we kind of came up with that plan together of being like, okay, we've done as much as we want to do inside. It wasn't as much as we could do. We could have done more. Like, we could have called the vet. We could have done lots of different things. But we were like, this is what we want to do. And if that wasn't good enough, then we'll deal with what happens. So that is really hard too. But but it was kind of like it made sense to the boys too. They were like, that makes sense. It doesn't make sense to call a vet for this and pay $300 and but we could do that. And it wasn't like we don't have enough money to do that. It was like we could figure out how to have enough money to do that if we really wanted to. So let's not make it about the money. Let's make it about what's the right thing for us to do. Because that's something that I hear a lot too, is like, we just can't afford to have the vet come out and take care of this. And like, no, you could. You really could figure it out. But that's okay to not want to call the vet for something. Which I feel like everything I'm saying is like, whoa. Like, there's going to be lots of people upset about what I'm saying. And this is another thing that I use with kids, with our kids. And then when I go to schools, I've been doing this a few times this year, where I go to schools and talk about how to sheep farm or how we sheep farm, and then make this little calendar. And it's really helpful for kids to see this, and really helpful for shepherds, because it kind of helps you remember what you're doing this for. So, like, as spring is starting, and we're thinking like, okay, here are the things we have to do in spring. We have to get our spring brains on and think about all these things. Hugo's looking over here at fall, being like, yeah, because if we do these things, then in fall we can sell all this stuff. and it's not, he doesn't care about the money that's coming in. He cares about like sharing these things with people. So his big enterprise is the skulls. So he likes taking the skulls and spray painting them. And I'll show you a picture later of the colors that he selected. But like, he sells those, and it's not so much for the money that he gets for them, but kind of the attention, and like, just look at this cool thing that I'm a part of, and people get really excited about it. But this is a good exercise to do, is to make your little calendar and write down all the things that are important to you in these parts of the year. And then in winter, be sure to write down leave the farm. We talked about this, the mimicking the wild, because it makes me happy. It really makes me happy. I do get some like grief for it a little bit, because it seems excessive and like too much work. Like yes, but you have to move the fence all the time, and yes, but you're like doing things that you shouldn't be doing. But so I wrote down there, like, you get a daily workout. And I remember in high school being like, I never want to work out in a gym ever. Like, gyms are disgusting, and I never want to have to pay to work out in a disgusting gym. And I wrote Blue Zone worthy, because Blue Zone's, there's like this Netflix special about parts of the world where people live over 100. And the only one I can remember is a group of shepherds. And I was like, yes, I'm doing it. And it was mainly because they moved their sheep around every day. You get some walking. We also, with the border collies, moving them every day is really helpful and a fun way to work the dogs. Okay, I think we talked about this too, right? This is an interesting perspective, and I try to talk to people about it at jobs, because a lot of times it just doesn't really make sense. Like, mainly with, I get a lot of grief from vegans, which is totally understandable. But my argument kind of is like, but what are we going to do? Are we just going to let them all die? And I'm kind of like, I didn't decide for them to be domesticated, but they're here and they rely on us. They rely on us for life and for death at this point. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you're doing. Are you shearing the sheep or killing the sheep?
Yeah, I'm shearing the sheep.
Okay.
Good question. Good
I
question.
can imagine maybe like a slit throat or something, but I can't tell.
Yeah, you can kind of see the wool coming off up here. Yeah, it's a little dark. Yeah, shearing. That's a good question, though. That's my work nightmare, reoccurring nightmare that I have, is that I show up to a job and I I like slaughter the first sheep, and the farmer goes, "I asked you here to shear." And I'm like, yeah. So in the fall, I'm doing a lot of shearing and a lot of slaughtering. So I like get to the job and I'm like, I'm here to shear, right? like what are we doing today? Yeah. Okay, this is another way that I like to talk about lambs, especially with kids, but also with grown-ups. This has been really helpful to me, thinking of lambs as flowers. So just like with the yews and the perennial plants, or annuals, but I like talking about perennials because I have a lot of perennials, that's probably why. But we feed the soil so that the perennials grow, and they come back every year, and every year they give us these flowers. Just like every year we put food into the soil, the sheep get food from the soil, and every year they give us lambs. And some of the flowers we pick, and we cut them, we bring them inside and put them on the table, and we enjoy them. Some of them we let go to seed, or we could let them stay out in the garden. Some of the lambs we are going to pick and enjoy and cut and bring them onto the table for us. And some we're going to let stay out there and have more sheep. And I really like doing this because it doesn't relate the sheep to humans, which isn't always appropriate. And I feel like it also gives us a stronger appreciation for like plants and flowers. And so this has been something that I have really loved thinking about and talking about lately. And I feel like it's a good one. What do you think? It's a good one, right? Yeah. Like it makes me feel, and also the other thing about it is it's like, there was this point when I was working at the Royal Butcher where it was like, the lambs that were coming in were kind of crap. They were like skinny and gummy and really hard to cut. And all the butchers I was working with, they hate cutting lambs. And I was like, I kind of get it. I mean, these lambs are hard to cut. So when a lamb loses fat, it's still got some muscle, but what was fat is now just like membrane. So then when you go on the bandsaw, which is what we cut everything on the bandsaw for lambs at the shop because it's faster, you would take a gummy lamb and run it on the bandsaw and it would like get sucked into the bandsaw. So it ended up being very dangerous for us to cut the lambs. And so of course the butchers would be like mad and annoyed that they had to do that instead of cutting pigs, which is like cutting clay and is amazing, you know? But I was kind of like, why is this happening? And I was also, shearing and going to farms, and it seemed like I was noticing shepherds kind of being like, we're going to keep the good sheep and like market the cull sheep, market the ones that aren't as good. And that just didn't feel very good. I was like, no, I want my market lambs to also be really good. I want all my sheep to be good. And that's helpful with the flowers. Like we pick the prettiest flowers to bring inside and put on the table. And I like that I'm at a point with my sheep where I'm like, I am keeping the very best ones to breed, but I limit myself to like 5. And then all of the other ones, I'm like, yes, like you're a beautiful flower that I would love to put on my table. And that just makes me feel better about farming and raising lambs. Like getting past the point of where you're just trying to get your sheep to survive, but your sheep are really thriving. That's exciting. Yeah. I kind of already talked about this. Yeah, so you can also throw out some questions too if you're... Okay, wait.
You just went too fast.
I went too fast. Do you want me to read that again? Okay, so, yep, this is what I just said. We went from surviving to thriving. Okay, so this is what I really want to say here is like, this is what I was going for. I was going for getting to that point where we're thriving. And what I wasn't expecting was that it was also setting me up for being in a stronger position to handle like the literal storms that were coming and figurative storms. So it was like when, like when my dad died, I had 2 little kids, and it was like a really hard summer. But my flock kind of took care of itself. Like I still had to do all the things, but it was like I could kind of take care of myself. Like even though I'm doing so many things and overextended, I can still have like this flock of sheep because I had set myself up well. And that was surprising. I didn't really realize I was doing that. And I wouldn't have that perspective if I wasn't going to other farms too. And seeing other like farms, or like seeing other farms that were really successful, some that were moderately successful, and then some that were not successful. But because I got to see all those things, I could put myself in there and be like, okay, where do I fall? And what do I need to do differently? So that was really surprising and important. And I was also surprised by how much pride we all got from the farm. The sense of pride in the farm because of like this known intention that we had and shared goals. So this is Hugo and his skull project. And so what we did, like he did not want to sell any of these. He wanted to keep them all. And I was like, how many skulls does one need? And what if I take a really beautiful picture of you and all the skulls, and you decide, like pick 2. And he ended up like, he had this picture and he picked 1 for himself to keep.
Did you just put them in acid, or did you just have them outside and then bugs and vultures?
Yes, bugs. So we have them, I have like 60 right now, because I make these earrings and they're hot. And so I'm like, okay, let's accumulate more skulls. And so I have like 60 skulls in like 4 old rabbit cages along the side of the woods. So they get bugs from under the ground, and then like maggots and like little critters, but not big enough critters that'll take the horns off or take the skulls away.
How long did that take?
It depends on the weather. So they've been in there since the fall. So I'm waiting for like a solid week. If I get 1 solid week of maggots, we're good. I just need them to loosen up just a little bit so I can pluck some of the horns actually pop off, and it's disgusting. Like if I tell everybody how gross it is to make the earrings, no one's gonna buy the earrings. But it's like pretty nasty. But yeah, the making the decisions together, sharing our farm with our friends, but also with people that we don't know. Doing those 2 things have been like really exciting for the kids and for myself. Also, we talk a lot about how when you're a farmer, you can kind of be all the things. So I talk about being a shepherd scientist a lot to my customers and when I'm doing workshops, because when you're a shepherd scientist, you're looking at the data collection points and collecting the data to see how you're doing as a shepherd. And like shearing day, you do that, slaughter day, you do that, and like around lambing. And so I talked to my boys about that. But we're also like artists, athletes, business people, kind of. And then, and it's fun. And I wrote like, if my kids don't farm, I think their friends will, because their friends are really into it. We have the 2nd grade came to the farm for a field trip last year. And when they left, like I think all of them were like, can I come over for a play date? Can I come? Can you teach me how to shear? Can you teach me how to do this? I was like, yes. It's great. Yeah. You don't have to do it all, but when you do it all, it can be really fun. So this is something that I had been wanting to make for a really long time, since I was back at Knoll Farm, and my neighbor helped me come up with a fun name for it. I call it the whole shablam. So when you order the whole shablam, you get a lamb cut and wrapped, a sheepskin skull, 4 bars of lamb fat soap, and 2 pairs of earrings. $900. sold like 10 in one day. So I was like, people are into it because there's a timeliness thing right now, with possibly because of the pandemic, because of climate change, because of these things. It's like, yeah, like use all the parts. Let's see what we can do with them. So Icelandics don't have great wool necessarily. It's not fine. It's pretty coarse, but it does come in different colors, and it does is dual coated. So the sheepskins are pretty cool. The wool from the sheep is natural colored, which is interesting. And I have horned Icelandics. So with the earrings, these are some of the earrings that I make. But why I'm so passionate about making them is because that is a data collection point, just the horns itself. So seeing how the horns are growing, like when you look at a horn, you can kind of read the life of the sheep, like rings on a tree or something. So like on this one, I can tell kind of how old it is. Like this is the first year, second year. Like these changes probably happened when the sheep went from eating grass to eating hay, or cold winter or something. And like first year, second year, third year, fourth year, and then like right here, like something great happened, like a change in feed or a new farm. But you can read these things, and also you can read like stresses. So if something bad happens, a lot of times like this might crack. So it's kind of interesting. You can kind of see the life of a sheep and a horn. But it also is kind of artistic and thoughtful, because it's like those stresses or those growth spurts make these beautiful lines, which is kind of a beautiful thing to remember. Like that the things that are hard can make you more beautiful, kind of thing. So when in the boxes, like when you buy a pair of earrings, it just says a little bit about reading the horns and being a better shepherd, or not necessarily being a better shepherd, but like, trying to be a good shepherd. Yarn is like the thing. Yeah, everybody's like, why do you have sheep? To make yarn, right? To make sweaters. And it's like, not really, because it costs so much to make yarn. But I also swap out the F word with flock a lot. That brings me a lot of joy. And my son recently did it at school. Did he tell you that? He got in the truck one day and he looked really sad, and I said, Garth, what's wrong? And he's like, I said a bad word at school today. And I said, well, what did you say? And he said, holy flocking sheep. And I was like, yeah, don't say that at school, but you can say it at home as much as you want. But that was very funny. I haven't talked to his teacher about it yet. But yeah, so making yarn is is a really great thing to do. But it is totally messed up right now. You can get really pretty nice yarn from across the planet for cheaper than you can get yarn nearby. And the more you know about it, the more you probably are going to want to buy the more expensive stuff that's closer to you, because of all the processing that goes into the yarn making. So washing wool or scouring wool can be pretty nasty for the environment, and we have really good scouring facilities nearby in the US. But it all costs more to do. So there's a great article that was in Taproot magazine about the true cost of a skein of yarn. And that's a good one to look up, because a skein of yarn that you might buy at Walmart or something, it's like $5, but the real cost of it is more like $50. Locally. So it's a hard one to wrap your head around. But when I do all these other products, I can afford the yarn and the wool processing. And I've also kind of done some tricks. So like this bottom picture is a yarn box. So like a holiday yarn box, you could get these 3 skeins of yarn, the note cards, the soap, and the salve. And it was like, that is, I forget what that is, but we'll say it was like $75 or $100. But I could sell all those boxes in the holidays and instead of trying to sell skein by skein. And that worked out better for me than trying to sell skeins of yarn to a yarn store or something like that. And then I also got roving made, which is pretty popular right now. Icelandic is great for felting, so you can use that as, I have like felting kits where you can like make your own little felted landscape on a piece of wool. Or you can wrap it around a bar of soap to make a felted soap bar, or you can hand spin it yourself. But having the roving made is less expensive than having yarn made. So I kind of every year do something a little bit different. So I'm like a wool producer, but not a very like reliable one. So like that's definitely the one thing that changes every year. And it's like, because I sell the skins and sell the meat and sell the horns and the earrings, then I can kind of experiment with doing a different thing with my wool every year, which is kind of working. But so a bar of soap wrapped in wool, so you felt the wool around it, and so when you're in the shower or when it's at the sink, you put a little water on it and you suds it up, and it like exfoliates, so it's like a soapy scrubby. It's awesome. And then when all the soap is gone, you just have this biodegradable scrubby that you can use to clean the shower, clean around the sink, and then like throw it in the yard or trash.
What do most people, when you're shearing, what do most people do with their wool around here?
All the things. So, but most people do something and sell it themselves.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of selling raw wool, but that's growing. So, right now, like remember that picture of the wool pool? It used to be kind of like that was the only option. And now there are several mills that will buy wool. There's Junction Fiber Mill's one of them. Aurora Mill's a new one, and but like Bat and Kill, like other ones outside of Vermont. And they will sometimes buy wool, and they're great. So if you have wool, it's great to talk to a mill about what they would do with it. Like, what is your wool good for? Mills are a great place to start. And then there's Muriel's of Vermont, who's a machine sweater making company. And they will like machine make sweaters for you to sell or for them to sell. And then there's the Vermont Pellet Company, who pelletizes wool. And they pay like $1 a pound, which is actually, it sounds like nothing, but it's like a pretty good price. And pelletized wool is like a soil enhancer. So it does lots of things. It does sciencey things that I don't know very much about. like it has certain things that compost has, and it improves the soil that way. But the thing that I understand better is like when you add these pellets to sandy soil or to clay soil, it balances those soils out and makes them more workable. And because they're pelletized, they become soil faster than if you just put wool in your compost. And so that was been a good one. And then there's a couple small like yarn clubs, and those places, a wool buyer will buy the wool and then do a run of yarn on it. I think that most of them might be out of business or changing hands. But, like 10 years ago, we didn't have those things as much as we do now. So that's great. But then the people that have like really clean fleeces, and they can bring them to the Vermont Sheep and Wool Festival, and we have a really nice fleece sale, which I also organize, so I should say it's really nice. But it's it's like tooting my own horn over here. But it is great because like it's a skirted fleece, so it's not washed. It's directly off the sheep. and then skirted. So inconsistent fibers are taken out, poopy parts are taken out, whatever. And those fleeces can be sold for quite a bit of money to hand spinners or people who want fleeces for any sort of thing. And so the fleeces range from like $25 to like $300 a fleece. And that's pretty exciting to get that much money for something that you put zero processing into. You did a lot of producing for it. But like yarn is a difficult item to get your money back for because the processing costs are so high. But I think that we have the consumers who will buy that, who will pay that price. But that's kind of a dilemma. I don't really know how that's going to ever get better, besides just consumers spending more money. And just a better, maybe less plastic, if there's, something, I don't know. But the people who get it, and they spend the money for it. And it seems like more and more people are getting it. Did I talk about different strokes for different folks? So I also say that like every day. Because I know that I can be a little overpowering with like, you should kill your pets and stuff. I do actually have a lot of customers that don't kill their pets in our sanctuaries or rescues or fiber flocks or school flocks, and that's okay. Like we come up with plans that work for them. Like a sanctuary or rescue is not a place that will be having lambs, so they're on a totally different program, which also means all of the sheep books out there should not be read by them because they're all for people who are lambing. So when like a person who has a pet flock is like really by the book, their sheep are going to get like really fat and have all these problems from being really fat. So we talk about like, if a sheep is not lambing every year, its needs are a lot different. So how do we accommodate those?
How do you keep track of them? Do you have them all labeled somehow with little tags or?
Oh, the sheep?
Yeah.
Yeah, ear tags. Uh-huh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but a lot of the flocks are small enough around here that people just know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but I highly suggest putting ear tags on because memories fail.
You would know, you would remember, oh, this one had difficulty birthing or something, really?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah. Well, and I write it all down, too. But usually when there's a difficult thing like that, it impacts me a lot. And I'm like, oh no, you're on the call list. And all of my sheep have names. Like, I'm my own worst customer. But I'm just like, Betty, no. It's like, you're not supposed to be having a difficult time. What are we going to do? Yeah, so, and also our sheep are not white. They're all different colors, so it's a little bit easier to tell them apart. Like Hugo, when he goes to other farms, he's like, how do people tell their sheep apart? They're all white. I'm like, they use ear tags. Yep, ear tags are tattoos. Yeah. All right, I think I really went over all of this stuff. And this is my last slide, thank God. This was a hard presentation for me to come up with. I was like, what am I going to be doing this whole time? Like usually it's like, okay, and that was the last leg of lamb. Now we're done. But yeah, and I talked about the anxiety I have for the planet, and that this is all does a lot for that. Yeah. Going out to South Dakota was great to do. I mean, the farming out there is so different. And it made me realize, like when we have certain rules or things that we know to do, like for shearing, it's like we should shear sheep like 6 weeks before they lamb. And I'm always breaking that rule because I've got to fit people in and shear them when I can shear them. And I'm constantly telling people it's fine for us to shear them a week or 2 before lambing because it's so low stress. We're not a farm that's 10,000 sheep. We're not running 700 sheep into a barn, like from across the farmyard. It's like we're going from where they're sleeping to like next to where they're sleeping. It's going to be fine. We'll take it easy and be careful about it. But so there's lots of things that I have learned with shearing that made a lot more sense out there, and made it, so I could kind of translate that to here a little differently. Yeah. Any questions? What do you got?
How did the competing go?
The competing is really interesting. So you get a score in 3 parts. There's a board score, a pen score, and your time. And so all of those factor in to your final score. So there were like 4 stations and 5 judges. So each shearer had a judge standing next to them, and then the 5th judge would tap a judge out, and they would go down the line. So the judge is constantly moving the whole time you're shearing your sheep, and so each shearer has a clicker that the judge is holding. So when the judge hands off the clicker to the next one, gets the clicker for that shearer. So every time you make a mistake, they click. Yeah. So every time you make a second cut, a nick, there's other certain rules, like if you pull the wool one way, you get a click. So that's your board score. And then you send the sheep through a chute to the back, and somebody catches the sheep, and they present it to a judge in the back who doesn't do clicks but does points for I guess at that point they're doing nicks more than on the board, for strips of wool that are like not level with the rest of the sheep, and maybe parts you forgot. So all those things are collected, and so you get another score there, and then your time. So a high score is bad. You want a low score. Yeah, so I competed in the blade shearing, which is like 2 butcher knives, and that got 3rd in the preliminaries, and ended up getting 3rd in the finals, which was like huge because I hadn't done that before. But I had a really good board score and a really good pen score, and my time was a little bit slower, but those low points helped me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm definitely competing again. Yeah, like I'm gonna go to New Zealand. Like I'm gonna go to the Golden Shears, even if I don't make the U.S. team. I'm gonna go. Yeah, as long as I can pay for it.
More earrings.
Yeah, more earrings.
I'm going to go way back to the beginning when you were on the island with all the sheep.
Yeah.
And you said that you observed certain behaviors
Yeah.
that, because they were sort of wild,
Yep.
were obvious. And I'm dying to know what the behaviors were.
Let's see. So a lot of it was like point of balance and flight zone. So like the island was this long sliver, like 3 miles long. And we had to scale the island and push them all to one end. And they could see us pretty well. There was bayberry and like a little bit of woods, but for the most part they could see us. So their flight zone is like, how close can we get to the sheep before they go in the opposite direction? And their flight zone was like a mile. Like we like kind of crested the hill, and they all looked at us and like went one way, and so we went another way, and they went all the way back. And so we had to kind of touch this bubble, be like, okay, how are we gonna get them to go this way? So we're gonna go that way. And that was just like amazing to see at that scale, because I've done that in a yard in a pen, but never at such a big scale before. And they're just so wild. So it was like there was no fooling them. They aren't going to come to a bucket of grain. They're not curious about us at all. So there was that. And then the point of balance is like if a cow is standing here, if you walk past their shoulder, they'll move forward. It's kind of like where around their body can you get them to move in the direction you want them to get to move in. And so we were kind of combining that with the flight zone to see how to get them to move. So there was that. And then I think the fact that they didn't have drinking water and that they're not fed hay, they just, everything nutritionally they had on their island and they were doing fine with. So as shepherds, we're like giving first cut or second cut and minerals and like a molasses lick and water and apple cider vinegar. Like we're giving them like all these things. And then this flock didn't get any of those things and were beautiful, you know? But not as productive as our flocks at home. So I was like, to get those twins, to get the fiber in a way that we wanted to get it, and like to get those extra products, we had to put them into these management systems. So it was kind of cool because that they're not wild, but they're basically wild, that flock. They're managed like 2 days out of the year, you know, or like 2 times a year for 3 days each kind of thing. And so that was like, okay, we're not putting a lot of time into this flock, but we are still getting a lot. And so that was kind of like, am I getting out of my flock, you know, kind of an appropriate amount to what I'm putting in? And I feel like I am. Like that was something that I came home and was like, I am, because of all these things. And I kind of like listed all the things that I get from having the sheep and the time that I put into them. And I was like, that feels good. But to see it stripped down so much with that flock helped me see it. And they didn't need any hoof trimming. That was another thing. Like, because they had all the rocks that they needed. And these are things that I'm always telling my customers. I'm like, you need to trim hooves more than once a year because, you know, like, they're not wild sheep. And in the wild, these sheep would be seeking out something for them to run their hooves on. They'd be like going on rocks as much as they're going on grass. And you're only giving them mushy grass to walk on. Then you gotta trim their hooves. I don't say it as mean as that, but in my head, I'm kind of like exasperated and mean like that. So it proved my point. I was like, these sheep don't need any hoof trimming ever. Like, they've never had their hoofs trimmed because they seek out what they need and they take care of it themselves and they have tons of rocks to go on. Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was super interesting. I loved it. It was a real great like reset for my brain too. And it did just that, like I was saying with the hooves, where it was like, see, I have been saying the right thing all these years. Because it was just kind of something I had been told but didn't really know. But then I got to really see it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question from online asking, kind of, when you're teaching the school kids, what do they get excited about? And have you thought about teaching any, or getting them involved with spinning so you have that future wool market?
Ooh, that's a great idea. The kids get really excited about the skulls. Skulls and skins, which I'm kind of excited about them being excited about because I'm like, well, that's the hardest thing. Like, that's the hardest thing to wrap your head around. And they do also get really excited about, like, at Shelburne Farms, I do their shearing demos every year. And that group of kids is the youngest group of kids that I shear for. It's a ton of 4-year-olds and younger. And that's strictly shearing. We're not talking about death at that point. We're just shearing the sheep and giving haircuts. And at that point, it's like talking about the softness and the lanolin that's in it. So the kids get really excited about the lanolin because there's this fear when kids or anybody see shearing that I'm gonna cut the sheep. And a lot of times I do. They get a little nick because the clippers have to be very strong to cut the wool. It's like they need to be like stronger to cut the wool. It's harder to cut the wool than it is to cut the skin, kind of. So, but the shearing positions, the whole dance that I'm doing, and so I explain this to the kids, the whole thing that I'm doing, I shear the sheep the same way every time, and it's a dance. And the dance stretches the sheep out so that it's nice and taut, and so I can run the clippers across them and not cut them. But the superpower that sheep have is that they have this oil that's like a wound healer. And the lanolin is like when you put wound cream on before you put a Band-Aid on. It's the same kind of thing. So even though I just nicked that sheep, we don't have to do anything to it because its own lanolin's going to heal it up. And that's something they get really excited about. But I haven't done much with wool processing with kids. But it would be fun to do that, wouldn't it? Probably. Messy, like, yeah, and like it's a whole nother skill that's really hard to learn. But yeah, I probably will get around to that someday. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
You've got this undercurrent of like constant apology about being a farmer.
I know.
And I'm wondering, like, what is a farm if it's not going to be producing
Yeah.
things from plants and animals?
I know.
Do we not have? Are you the only farmer doing this like this?
No, not at all. But I think it's because it's sheep, really. Like,
Okay.
with cows and pigs, it's not really the same. There isn't that same demographic of people buying cows and pigs who are refusing to slaughter them. But with sheep, there's something about sheep and goats where they are so easy to have as a pet. And so a lot of my customers do have them as pets. And I'm like, you're a great sheep farmer. They could be livestock instead of pets. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so there's a lot of times where I'm like really trying not to get them to turn me off.
Right.
I want to keep having those conversations. Like I want to keep shearing the pets, and hopefully, like,
That helps.
you know, like just be like with they are livestock, they're not pets.
Right.
But I get what you're doing, and I know I can see that you love them, and let's figure out a way to do this that doesn't harm the sheep. And so, like, especially with sanctuaries and rescues, there's so much love and intention there. But with that, you can make a lot of mistakes by taking in too many animals, and you can throw your whole rescue plan out the window by bringing in sheep that then disease all the other sheep that you just rescued. So it's kind of like, I want to keep being there for all of the shepherds. And so sometimes it does feel like I'm like, oh my God, I got to tiptoe around this. How am I going to talk about this really difficult thing? But I just want to talk about it because we have to before, I guess I have this fear of maybe all the sheep becoming pets. And then and they're also the worst sheep to shear, like pet sheep. They're like no longer sheep anymore. They're just like maybe dogs or humans. Like they don't know what they are. So when I do the dance to shear them, they're like trying to touch my face and they're like trying to stand, and that they're not being sheep anymore. And it's so hard to shear them. So yeah.
Yeah, this isn't a question, it's just a real appreciation. It's rare to hear somebody speak with such like honesty and clarity about life and death.
Oh, clarity, good. I was like, am I gonna be clear?
I come to this comment from lots of places. Like I interned as a palliative care chaplain at the hospital. Like, you know, I've had to put dogs down. Like, and I feel like we do ourselves as human beings a real disservice by not speaking and experiencing death
Yeah.
correctly. And I just like we
Yeah.
talk to lots of people.
Yeah.
We talk to
Right?
doctors, I want everybody to hear what you have to say because
I have like a whole series of children's books that I want to write right now.
yeah, so really thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Hmm.
You've talked about teaching at the grade school level. Are you also teaching at the vocational level?
I've done a little bit. I've done a little bit with tech, like high school tech programs, and I spoke at Dartmouth for a food history class, I believe it was, and yeah, the high schoolers were a great age to talk to, and we did a slaughter together, so that's been fun. Yeah, and I would love to do. Yeah, not quite with the grade school kids, but a lot of kids come to certain jobs. So if I'm slaughtering for somebody who has young kids, it's not uncommon for them to bring 5 friends over, and then I've got
Do you
a
ever
bunch
have
of
anybody
8-year-olds.
intern with you or anything like that?
A little bit. It's so hard for me right now to manage another person's schedule. So I'm kind of the great thing about having my own business is that I make my own schedule. So I'm every day going to multiple farms, and pretty much every day. I try to take Sundays off and Thursdays, but for the next 2 weeks I'm working every day. And so I do have to rearrange my schedule a lot. So that's been hard to do with somebody else. But I've had a mentee through this mentorship program through the American sheep industry, which they're doing every year now. And in that program, the mentee and the mentor, who are both shearers, get paid a stipend to work together. And I did that, and that helped a lot.
You've also taught at the college?
Oh, Sterling. That was probably Sterling I go to often. Sterling College is great. I love working with them. And they actually had Temple Grandin come to this week-long thing that I did there. Bye, guys.
Sorry, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. So I was doing a killing and cutting week-long thing. And Temple Grandin was there one night, which was I'm so thankful to Sterling for setting that all up and having me there. It was great. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of like teaching a lot.
Clearly.
Yeah, the other teaching I do a lot is through rural Vermont. So we do workshops regularly, several throughout the year. And that's really fun. So we spend the morning slaughtering, take a lunch break, and then spend the afternoon cutting. And going over how to do on-farm slaughter legally in Vermont. Mm-hmm. And did some advocacy through them too. So I did a lot of testifying to the State House and went to DC and all with humane animal handling and food sovereignty stuff. So we went to Cory Booker's office, and he's a vegetarian or vegan, and that was really interesting to do because it was we really think you're going to be on the same page as us, even though we're here talking about killing animals. We do it with this intention of food sovereignty and soil improvement and that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's kind of a touchy subject right now anyway, politically, because farming kind of gets a bad rap for being really bad for the environment, but farming can also be beneficial to the environment if it's done right. So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.